Welcome to the Anatomy of a Strategy podcast. I'm Carlos Pacheco.
I'm Tara Hunt.
And this week we welcome Charlene Li. Charlene is in the business of helping brands predict the future. The founder of Altimeter Group, now under the Profit Company umbrella, a company that helps companies to leverage disruptive tech by providing research and advice. She's the author of 6 books, most recently, The Disruption Mindset, Why Some Businesses Transform While Others Fail. Charlene is also a very popular speaker and joins many of the Anatomy alumni in being a TED speaker, as well as speaking at South by Southwest and the World Business Forum. She's also recognized on countless lists, including Fast Company and AdAge, as a top influencer.
And here is a fun little factoid as well. Carlos, I don't know if you know this, but Charlene and I had a podcast, very short-lived podcast, many years ago.
What? What was it called?
You know, I can't even remember. Maybe Charlene will be able to remember when we chat with her, but it was her, me, and Sarah Lacey. And it was this podcast app that when you called into it, so the three of us would call in, it would record, and then they would do like the editing and post it. It was in 2009, right as my book was coming out. Charlene's, I think, first or second book, I'm not sure which book it was, had come out the previous fall. Sarah Lacey had, I think she had 2 books out, and this podcast platform reached out to us. And I think what happened was, you know, we were very new to podcasting. We had no idea how to plan and like what to do. And there weren't a lot of examples of people that were planning podcasts out there. And I actually remember I was in Toronto and calling in, and I think we were talking about the travel industry and disruption happening in the travel industry. I can't even remember what our themes were other than maybe digital disruption at the time. I mean, this has been a long time theme for Charlene. She's been working on this stuff forever. I also hired her around that time to come speak at Transit Camp Bay Area.
Oh.
And she came and spoke to like a group of transit people like BART and Caltrain, et cetera, as well as I think there were Google people there and NextBus and a whole bunch of people that were working in the public in the transit space. And her talk was amazing and really set a really nice stage for our proceedings for the rest of the day, which was really about disrupting the public transit stage. Anyway, so I've known Charlene for a long time. You know, we don't talk on a regular basis, which is sad because I think both of us are very busy. But she has gone on to do amazing things, and I'm really looking forward to talking with her about her latest book, The Disruption Mindset.
So am I. Let's not wait any longer. Let's get to the conversation.
Welcome to the Anatomy of a Strategy podcast, Charlene. So excited to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Tara. So excited.
Yeah, it's been a long time. We're not going to take a walk down memory lane. I've already explained it in the intro, our history. Let's just go right into it. For those of you who do not know who you are and who may have been living under a rock, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and why you're here.
Yeah, I have been a longtime analyst. I was at Forrester and then started my own company called Altimeter back in 2008. Sold that in 2015 to Profit. And I've been writing books. My first one was Groundswell, did a New York Times bestseller called Open Leadership. And my latest book, the 6th one I've written, is called The Disruption Mindset. And that's why I'm here today.
Actually, many years ago, I read Groundswell. I read The Open Leader, and I just finished reading Disruptive Mindset, and it is amazing. I took so many notes, and it's funny that we're reading it at this very moment because we don't see ourselves in the huge companies and examples that you talk about in the book and who you've worked with. But there are so many pieces to this book and the advice that you give that I am applying in our little company here too. But let's, for those who haven't read the book yet, and I don't want to give everything away because everybody should go out and buy it. I do want to ask you a few questions about it. The first is, and this is a big aha moment for me, is a big gulp moment. What is a big gulp moment?
Well, other than the time when you get a really big soft drink in your hand, for those of you with 7-Elevens, it is a time when you are thinking about executing and making a decision to go forward with a disruption strategy, and you're staring into the abyss. And it looks like, how on earth are we going to make this happen? I know we can do it. I know we have to do it, but it's awfully scary. So you take a big gulp, you hold the hands of the people around you, and you jump.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So you talk about a 3-step strategy as part of this big gulp. And the first two, didn't feel very big gulp to me. It felt like rigorous research. Yeah, I can get behind, and securing buy-in. Cool. There's this concept that you talk about as the third step, and that's where I took the big gulp. Can you talk about burning the boats a bit and why that's really important? To just, in that disruption process?
Yes. When you burn the boats, you're saying, we're never going to turn back. The only way forward is to go and execute this thing like there is no tomorrow. And it comes from this idea of Alexander the Great. When he went to go conquer the world, he burned the boat. So his soldiers he basically said to the soldiers, we either go forward and we conquer and we win, and we sail back in our enemy's boats, or we die. So it's kind of like no holds barred, move forward. And it forces everyone to move forward if you think about the future. You can't go back. Well, maybe if it doesn't work, we can go to just back to where we were before. Can't go back.
That is where I literally I read this story, and I read the philosophy and even some of the case studies behind it. And that's where I found myself with huge butterflies in my chest, because I knew that, with what we're doing and building, that I needed to burn some boats in that moment, because like you say in the book, if you leave the boats there, you could just back out at any time. And that's a message that also you send to your team.
Right. And you're saying to your team, we have the emergency hatch here. So if it gets too hard, if it gets uncomfortable, we can always just get back on boats and go back home.
Yeah.
And frankly, that's what happens a lot of times when people are trying to create disruption. You see it in all the digital transformation initiatives that people are doing, and the vast majority of them fail because they haven't burned the boats. As soon as it gets hard, people go running to the CEO, like, we can't do this. Well, we can't meet our quarterly goals, or people are on an upward. This is hard. And the CEO goes, okay, fine. We'll scale it back. We'll go back in the boats.
Yeah.
When you burn the boats, there's no going back. There's a full out commitment from everybody to make it work, no matter how ugly it might look.
Can you give us some of the examples of how you would burn boats in these situations?
Well, I think the example I had in the book was of Adobe. When they moved from packaged software to the cloud, they were running them side by side for a little while. And then one day they came out and at a user conference announced that they were no longer going to be developing and improving the packaged software. And so this is the last version. If you wanted upgraded versions, you had to go to the cloud. They burned that boat. They really burnt it because 50,000 people signed a petition saying, no, we want to go back. And they said, no, sorry, there's no boat to go back onto.
Yeah, it ticked off they're huge, many of their huge customers, right?
People were really upset. They're still upset today. So people are like, I can't believe Adobe did this to us. And I heard it today just in another meeting. So when they said there was no going back,
right,
they had to burn the boat for everybody because they knew how emotionally tied people were to the old product. And they said, there's nothing there anymore. We've killed it. There's no going back.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of it's not a case study that you had in your book, but something that I actually encountered when I worked for a short stint at Intuit. They were really tied to that green box that they were selling in Office Depot and Best Buy, etc. Because of that, because that was where their big money was coming from, they just really didn't put the kind of efforts and money and resources at that time into their cloud-based software. And so, of course, people weren't buying the cloud-based software. So it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess, in that way.
Yeah. And I like to say that for existing companies, your customers, your best, most beautiful, most profitable customers are a curse. Because when you have an installed base, you just want to keep them happy. That's the thing you're supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
But it's just the opposite. It doesn't allow you to say, well, where are the opportunities emerging when you're lulled into this comfort zone of serving your beautiful customers who are perfectly happy with you? Hard to make that investment into new spaces.
Totally. And you talk as well about identifying future customers versus existing customers. So I know just from the work that we do, this comes up a lot. What kind of process and where do companies find future customers when their existing customers seem to be perfectly awesome?
Yeah. Well, I guarantee you that some of your future customers are not that happy with you, or they're thinking about the future and they may or may not be including you in it because you're not talking about the future. You're working on the present. So a great place to start, if nothing else, is to talk with your customers about what their future looks like, how their needs are changing, maybe even showing them how their needs are changing that they may not even be aware of to help them find their own future customers. And then look at the edges. Go to your front lines and ask the people there, who do you hear from that we're not serving very well today? Do they represent some emerging needs? Do they represent a hidden narrative that we're not aware of? And be lifting up those rocks and be curious, what's lying under there? Can we find some future customers in all these buried places that we're not normally looking?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a big process for sure. And it takes resources, and it also takes it definitely takes getting out of the office, I would imagine, getting out of the boardroom, getting out of the day-to-day and the weeds. What are some of the things that companies could do to start looking further or deeper into who this is?
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can do is to expand it beyond the traditional market research team and to make this a responsibility of every single person in the company to be thinking about the customer experience, to be looking for those future customers. If you think about it, the people most likely to see a future customers are the people who actually work with customers every day on the front lines. And the difference between now and just even like 5 years ago is that in the past, if somebody actually saw an interesting development, it wouldn't go anywhere. There was no way for that individual person, that individual voice to be heard throughout the rest of the organization. Today, we have the internal tools that we can actually amplify it to find that person, and they have a venue to be able to be heard. The question is, are we actually looking for and listening for that voice?
Yeah. It's sort of like there's like this big riddle that just kept playing over and over in my head when I was reading the book and thinking, how does a company know when they should be looking? And how do you know when you should be sort of disrupting yourself or that you're about to be disrupted? How do you identify that and understand like that should be a shift in your priority?
Here's the thing. If your strategy is about looking out into the future and anticipating how your company needs to change and where it needs to be 3 to 5 years from now, because that's what strategy is, you have to have an idea of who your future customer is. Otherwise, you're serving your current customers 3 to 5 years from now.
Right.
That's the essential part of strategy, is to say, where are we going to go off in the future and how do we prepare for that today? So we need to have an idea of who our future customer is to make the investments today. The discomfort that people have is that I'm not sure that's my future customer. So am I comfortable committing resources today for unknown, unseeable, uncertain future? The only way you can continue to do this is that I have an idea if I'm on the right way. I'm constantly testing to make sure that I'm getting closer and closer to that future customer. And I've worked out all the different paths and scenarios about how this could potentially unfold. So as the road is revealed to me, I will figure out which routes to actually take to get to that point.
So yeah, that takes a kind of a special kind of leader to recognize everything that you're you're saying here, which, sort of nicely dovetails into, as you talk about qualities of a disruptive organization, disruptive leader. Let's move into that. And if you're leading something, say you're listening to this and you're like, okay, great. I want to create this organization. I want to be that leader that recognizes this. Like, what are the qualities that you either need to adopt or hone or have in order to be a truly disruptive leader?
Well, I think the key thing to understand is that leadership is very different when you're pursuing a disruption strategy, because your strategy is trying to create disruption, create exponential growth. And your leadership has to change also as well. You're not managing things, you're leading this huge amount of change. And you've got to start thinking about running and leading, creating a movement. And a movement says other people are following you and becoming leaders themselves. They take on this charge and the purpose of what you're trying to create and become leaders and create their own followers. And you need a movement because this is going to be a really hard and long journey. I like to say that we've been fooling ourselves, giving ourselves this false promise of, quote, innovation, that it'll be easy. And the reality is this is really hard work. So the movement actually sustains people through those tough times and over those obstacles. What I found in my research, I surveyed 1,000 leaders all around the world, and I found there were 2 characteristics that made you more comfortable being a disruptive leader, more comfortable and confident. The first one is an openness to change mindset, meaning that when you see change, you look at it as an opportunity. You get excited about it because there's these great opportunities to create change and growth versus seeing it as a threat and something that stresses you out and worries you. The other factor is a leadership component where your behavior emphasizes empowering people and inspiring them to create that change. So again, very related to creating a movement. It's a combination of these 2 factors that really results in a disruptive leader capable of creating exponential change.
Yeah. And so I love this idea of the movement and movement creation. And one of the quotes I think that you that sort of transitions into that chapter of the book by the founder of Giving Tuesday, I think, saying a movement, it's not a movement until like it moves without you, I think I'm paraphrasing it terribly at this point. And I think that's like such a powerful idea. And it was like a huge aha moment for me because we hear companies all the time talking about movements. In fact, it almost got a little bit insufferable because it became like kind of this, like movement, like greenwashing or movement washing. It's like we're starting this movement, but they're the only ones really moving in it, recognizing that. And also, I mean, both you and I have been part of movements very much so in the past. I'm proud to say that, I was part of co-working in the early days, which became such a movement that like they're still having big conferences today and nobody knows who the heck I am. So I can be super proud of the fact that that movement went on without me. Although feeling a little FOMO these days. Creating a movement isn't trivial. What advice do you give for companies who are like, yeah, that sounds great. I need to start a movement. Like, how do they create that movement?
A couple things. First of all, I love that quote. It's not a movement unless it moves without you. And the whole idea is that you've got to create followers. And this is the flip side of the coin from leadership, which is followership. And it's that you think really actively about how people will decide to follow you, what kind of relationship will you have with followers, and really nurturing that relationship. It's bringing them in so that they become the leaders themselves, and then will create movements in of themselves. And when the movements are really powerful when other people see it in of themselves. So you could be a customer, you could be a partner, but you are putting on the mantle of creating that change yourself because you so believe in this movement. So I think in many ways, when people talk about creating a movement, they're talking about so just virality, just having something be viral. That's very different. than this really having an impact and a deep-seated change in the ways that people have relationships with each other. I think one of the most powerful ways to begin this is with a statement. I call it the manifesto. Some brands may be thinking about this as part of their purpose statement or getting to that, but a manifesto is a statement of your beliefs, of how the world needs to change and how you're going to be a part of that change to make it happen. And manifestos are the statement of belief that can be extremely motivating and galvanizing for people to join that movement and take it up on themselves.
I love that you brought manifest. You're bringing manifestos back. I was like, yes, go riot, girl, Charlene, because that was like, I don't know about you, but it was like a big thing for me in the early 90s. And also one of those things that actually a manifesto brought me into marketing. It was the Clue Train manifesto.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And then there was like...
marketing is about conversations.
Yes, markets and conversations. I mean, I remember a lot of the points of the Clue Train manifesto. I think it drove a lot of us in the early days to think differently about marketing. And then, there was like this whole manifesto. I think the 90s were like huge, and early 2000, maybe huge manifestos. And then manifestos kind of, I think maybe they got co-opted or something and they lost their meaning after a while. But I love that you bring them back for this because I think they are really positive and strong. But you approach a manifesto not just about like putting it out there it's not about a marketing message. It's about something much deeper and more meaningful. Do you want to talk about like what makes for a great manifesto in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, I talk a little bit about how to write one. I saw it on a blog by somebody else, and I just wanted to throw it in, which is you start with a rant about what's wrong with the world. And then you flip it on its head and say, because the world is it's like messed up in this way, we think we could actually fix it. We believe that the world deserves something better than what we have today. And this is what we think we're going to do about it to make that change happen. So I think in some ways, again, it goes back to the beliefs that you have, the things that you hold to be true.
Yeah.
You're not trying to convince everybody. You're trying to find the other people who believe in the same things. We hold these truths to be self-evident. We're going to come here and do this. Our Declaration of Independence in the United States is a manifesto.
Yeah.
So I think there's something really galvanizing around these things. And we try to stick in our heads so much around strategies and business and measurements. Those are extremely important. But knowing how difficult disruption is, I think we also need to understand that this is an issue of the heart, that we are going to feel discombobulated because this is so hard. Disruption happens when the way that we see the world, the relationships, the way that power sits is torn apart. It's all thrown up in the air. We've got to put them back into some semblance of order again. And that process of creating that order, creating that new area is what disruption is all about. Yeah,
absolutely. And the manifesto is like, I feel like is a bit of it's a rallying cry for that movement making, like a strongly worded stake in the ground for the starting point. And then there is a bit of a blueprint for action as well. And that's what I liked about the way that you set it out, because it wasn't just about a bunch of pithy statements there. You talked about how important it is. I think you used the T-Mobile example and talked about how important it was to actually follow through in like everything that you do, tying back to that manifesto as well.
Right. So T-Mobile is a great example because when you think about disruption, we oftentimes are looking for the innovation or the technology. There was nothing technology oriented in what T-Mobile did. They had a new value prop of being the uncarrier. But it wasn't just something they said, it's something they did up and down throughout the organization. They reoriented themselves to be the customer advocate, to be for the customer. So they tore up contracts and said, you can leave us at any time if you're unhappy, but we don't think you ever will.
Yeah.
They gave people unlimited data, for example, on calling time. They give you Netflix. They did so many things differently. And they spoke to customers and to employees in a very different way, unlike any other carrier. So they did everything differently. They changed everything.
Yeah.
So when they wrote their manifesto, it was something that they used to push this new way of thinking, of being, up and down and throughout the entire organization.
Yeah, and I think what's really cool about what they did is they actually forced other carriers to follow suit, because they showed their customers a new possibility as well, and really disrupted the entire industry, not just themselves.
Right. And somebody was saying, well, they had no choice because they were the distance fourth player. They had to go and do something disruptive. No, they could have just become, I think they were looking at becoming the urban brand or the youth brand and playing by the same game of always selling by network coverage and price.
Yeah.
And they decided to change the game and said, no, we're going to focus on what our customers want. Or more importantly, what they focus on is what were their customers angry about. They found this underlying narrative that people were really angry at the mobile carriers. So they took that and said, like, how can we make them happy and love us?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think people are still a little mad at their mobile carriers, but less so nowadays, because those contracts really, they felt like a little bit about that. I think that was like the first step for T-Mobile. Contracts felt like they trapped us in a lot of ways. You know, as a long time cell phone customer, like that was the biggest thing, was that you had to sign was at least 2 years. There was nothing shorter. And if you tried to get out of a plan, you were charged a lot of money. What other industry could have got away with that? I don't know.
And again, there was this huge accepted way that this is how everybody did things. And when T-Mobile goes, no, we're not going to play that game anymore, everybody said, you're crazy. You're going to kill the business with all of us. Yeah. And they did. They changed their contracts, and the Sprint and Verizon followed. And finally, AT&T, after 2 years, said, yeah, we're going to get rid of contracts too. So they were highly disruptive in terms of forcing this change into the industry.
Absolutely. And so John Legere, I love I think there was, you had put in like a photo in the book, like his transformation during that time too. He starts out like this clean cut suit wearing guy, and that's not at all who he is today. Like he went through a transformation and disruption of his own personal brand during that time too, which I just find.
Yes. And also in the way that he thinks about things, he launched this, and then his daughter is in interactive marketing. So she showed her dad, this is how you use Twitter and Facebook, and this is how you connect with customers and employees directly. And he loved it. So he went online over the weekend. He comes in on Monday, and his security team is waiting for him, saying, we're sorry, Mr. Ledger, but somebody's impersonating you on Twitter. And he goes, no, that's me. I'm out there doing this stuff. So he has more people following on Twitter than all the mobile carriers or corporate accounts combined. He has this crazy slow cooker show on Sundays that has almost 7 million people following it. And he is the walking personification of the Un-carrier.
Yeah.
He goes and visits the call centers, and he goes on a Segway so he can go up and down the aisle so he can high five people as they're going along. And I swear there are confetti cannons going off at the same time.
It's amazing.
A celebration of the employees.
Yeah, I mean that's great. I mean, like I have not looked into his history prior to that transformation, but that transformation happened at T-Mobile during the Un-carrier revolution. Like, I wonder if I would imagine that guy was inside of him the entire time as he was being clean cut, John, coming up through the ranks over time.
Yeah, I think there's always been this side of him, and the Un-carrier strategy just brought it out even more. But I think, again, you see it in the execution. as you were saying, it's such a good point. This isn't just about someone talking about disruption or talking about being an uncarrier. John Ledger and the rest of the company live this every single day. I walked into a T-Mobile store just randomly in some mall someplace, and I walked up to the salespeople like, so tell me how you guys are an uncarrier. What does it mean for you in your job? And they went on, we're all about customers. Half of my commission comes from my direct sales, and the other half is based on how happy our customers are in our store. And the two people in the store went on and on talking about how they were, I'm not like, this is a store in the middle of nowhere. They have no idea who I am.
Right.
And they were being the uncarrier. It was pretty extraordinary to see that.
That's amazing. And that's a huge contrast. I think you tell another story and you don't reveal the company in the book where like the manager is sitting there with her direct reports and says, oh, tell Charlene what our 5 points of, change or disruption are going to be this year. And all of them kind of looked at each other blank, like, can't remember, which is often what happens.
It was extraordinary. I mean, it was a marketing, training. They had been on a marketing offsite for days early in the year, and they could not talk about what their 5 strategic goals were for the year. Nobody could name them.
So crazy. That shows you like a company putting something, maybe in a memo or a poster or like something, and the other company living living that manifesto, living that change. It's so remarkable.
Yeah, if you think about, you talk about strategy all the time yourself, and it's a strategy only if it's actually being lived and executed. It's not a strategy if it's in a beautiful PowerPoint and a binder and sitting on a shelf or in your folder someplace. If you're not living your strategy every single day, then it's not a strategy. You're just doing a job. You're pushing the decks around on the Titanic, the chairs around on the deck of the Titanic. You're not really moving anywhere.
I think we just got one of our like super quotes that we'll be pulling from from the podcast to promote this. So back to the disruptive leaders. Like I think you have the link. It's charleneli.com/disruption-mindset. And I did the disruptive leadership archetype quiz, by the way. Everybody should go do it. Doesn't take very long and it's super interesting. I thought for sure that I was going to be an agent provocateur. And when I was going into this, I was like, I already know what I'm going to be. When you go into a quiz, and I ended up being a realist optimist, which I was really surprised with. Can you talk a little bit about the 4 archetypes of disruptive leaders? Because it's not just the John Ledger type that is needed to disrupt an organization. You don't have to wear pink and grow your hair long. There's other types.
Oh, hopefully not. Could you imagine the world? So what I ask people to rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 10 about how disruptive they are. 1 being not disruptive at all. You like everything to be the same every day. And 10 being, I not only like things to be disruptive, I am very confident that I can disrupt and create exponential growth. And that's a very key definition here. This isn't just about blowing things up. It's also about making a huge impact and change. And so what I found in running all this analysis, surveying 1,000 people across 5 different countries, there were 2 factors that kept coming up over and over again. The first one is an openness to change mindset, meaning that you see change as something that represents opportunity versus you see change as a threat and something to be avoided. The other factor was a leadership behavior around empowering and inspiring people to take actions. And again, that's very related to this whole idea of driving a movement. When you're high in both of those, you become an archetype, what I call the realist optimist, which is what you are. And these people can not only see the future, but they can also take the steps to make it happen. The agent provocateurs can see the future, but their skills in that leadership behavior aren't that great. And Tara, you and I know a lot of people who love to get on a stage, wave their hand, say disrupt or die, and then walk off the stage and nothing has changed.
Yeah.
So that's an agent provocateur.
Yeah.
A steadfast manager is really good at the leadership behaviors. They can get things done, and especially by mobilizing a lot of people, but they're not that comfortable with change. So they're more managers versus leaders, because leaders create change. And if you're not leading that change, then you're more of a manager of the status quo. But my favorite group are the worried skeptics. They really don't like change, and they're more individual contributors. Their leadership scope and capacity is much closer into them. And they tend to be the people who just look at a new situation and go, nah, don't want to go there. You're sort of dragging them along.
Thank you, I'll pass.
Every organization has these people. Every organization has all four of these archetypes. And the way I think about it is you could be a 3 on that scale of 1 to 10, but if your organization is a 2, you are killing it, right? You are highly disruptive to people. But you could be an 8, but if your organization is like a 9 or a 10, then you're the laggard. You're the worried skeptic. So the worried skeptics are important because as long as that worried skeptic believes in what your strategy is, that you want to serve these future customers, you want to go towards this future, as long as they can buy into that opportunity, they may be scared out of their minds by it, but they see that rationally we need to go there, even though their heart says, like, do not do this, then you're okay. If they do not buy into the strategy, then you have to have a different discussion, which is, do you have a future in this company?
Right.
Because you don't want to drag people along who don't buy into the strategy.
Yeah.
But if they buy into it, then tap into their natural inclination to think about things that could go wrong. Because if you're going to go into the future as fast as you can, you need to develop all the contingency plans, all the scenarios and ways about how you're going to navigate through all those boulders. And the worried skeptics can be really good at that, because you can only move as fast as your slowest worried skeptic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love that you didn't say like, this is a better person for, this archetype is better than that one. It was more like this is what you need from each of these archetypes. And you even give pairings and how that works really well together, and the kind of pairings that actually drive smart disruption. And I like to think I'm, sitting here with Carlos, who's been quite silent during this.
I'm being a worried skeptic.
He's always been, even in our relationship, the worried skeptic, where, yes, I'm the realist optimist, but sometimes I have been the agent provocateur, and it's a pairing that works really well. And now I've promoted 2 of our star employees, and one of them rests somewhere between steadfast manager and worried skeptic. And it's great because she's always bringing up scenarios that I was like way too optimistic about. And so it makes us, I think, smarter about each move, for sure. Very cool.
All types.
Yeah, for sure. So we don't go like too far into time here, so that, and don't give away all of your book, because I think people should go out and get it. One last question I have is around culture, because we've talked about leadership. We've talked about, burning the boats. We've talked about like that big Gulp moment and creating movements. But one of the pieces, and you mentioned this against the leader, is like the culture of your organization in and of itself. How can you recognize, I think you call it a stuck culture versus a flux culture. Can you describe that a little bit, and what makes for a flux versus a stuck culture?
Yes, stuck cultures, we think of them as people who say, this is the way we've always done things, and it's always worked for us. Like 80% of our customers come through this one channel, so we're just going to put all our efforts into that one channel. So the ability to try new things and do new things is really antithetical to what that company does. Flux cultures say something very different. This has worked in the past, but I'm paranoid that it's not going to work in the future. There's got to be a better way. So they're constantly saying, what is the flux that can happen? How do we actually deal with change? And they deal with change and disruption seemingly in an unflappable way.
Right.
We all look at these organizations that seem to just roll through tons of change and disruption just kind of seamlessly. In reality, they're paddling very, very furiously, but they're thriving with the disruption rather than being beaten down by it.
Right.
There's something in the water that they drink that allows them to be more disruptive than the rest of us.
Yeah, and it's funny. You can see it kind of from the outside. Have you seen the Imagineering documentary yet?
I haven't.
Yeah, if you have Disney Plus, which I'm sure you don't have a ton of time to watch a lot of stuff. It's on there. And it was recommended to us by some friends. And I'm really glad we watched it because it seems to me like you would be fascinated with all of this, with the Disney. I think you even quote Walt Disney, but with the Disney culture, how Imagineering is the name that they give. The engineers that are thinking of like that future, really cool stuff, right? And over time, Disney has sort of ebbed and flowed based on how much a CEO actually honors what the Imagineers do over time, if that makes sense. So through times of austerity, when they brought in a CEO to like batten down the hatches or whatever and tighten things up, and Imagineering has been suppressed, Disney's not done very well. Whereas Bob Iger now has come in and, as we can see, is completely killing it. And he's obsessed with Imagineering. And that's like he's put so much resources in. And I think they're like kind of the heart and soul of their flux culture.
Yes. And I think the wonderful thing about Disney is that they have thought about how to take not just the creative process of Imagineering and have that be the heartbeat of the company, but every single person is thinking about the customer experience. Even the person in the park picking up the trash is thinking about the experience.
Yeah.
Everybody is. And that's the magic of Disney, is they're so completely obsessed with what that experience looks and feels like for their guests.
Yeah, the original. I think if you get a chance, and you have Disney Plus, but I think you can do a trial. You can watch. You should watch. I think you would be there would be a lot of great little nuggets in there that prove your thesis over and over again with sort of how they've ebbed and flowed over the years. But one of sort of the original visions, and one of the things that you keep hearing from the Imagineers over time, is their obsessive compulsiveness around creating like such a level of experience that people forget that they're like, that they don't see that whole, like, you don't see the wires, you don't see the machinery. Like all of a sudden you're transformed. You're in the middle of Star Wars. You're in the middle of a different world altogether. And you've forgotten where you are, right? You've forgotten that you're in a park altogether. It's pretty amazing. Made me really want to go see go visit every theme park in the world. Awesome. Oh my gosh. It's been so amazing to catch up with you. It's been wonderful to see all of the ways in which you have influenced the world. And way back when I had you come and speak at a transit camp, all the way to, you helping guide some of the biggest organizations through huge disruptions themselves. I'm just really honored to have you here on our podcast. And I loved your book. I think everybody should go out and buy it, read it, listen to it, download all of the learning materials, take the test, all that stuff. I will do that pitch. But Charlene, is there anything else that people should do if they want to know and learn more? Where can they follow you?
Yes, there's one more thing, as I like to say. And that is, I started a community for disruptors called Quantum Networks.
Ooh.
And you can find it at quantum-networks.com. And the reason I wrote a manifesto and everything for it.
Nice.
The reason I did this is because, as you know, Tara, it's awfully lonely. It's hard being a disruptor.
Yep.
And where do we go to find support? Because there's no industry association for disruptors. So I wanted to create a place where we could connect with each other in person, online, in small groups, where we can learn from each other and our peers and just see what happens. This is me working way out of my comfort zone. Despite being in social and communities, I've never actually started a community myself. it's nerve-wracking.
Right.
I worry that, I'm not doing enough, and how are people feeling? How do I make them, feel comfortable and thrive as a disruptor? So this is my passion, to unleash the potential of every single disruptive leader, because we have so much work to do. There's so much change that needs to happen in our world, and we need leaders to be as disruptive as they are capable.
Amazing.
That's what I'm trying to build there. I hope people will come and join us.
Yes. Well, I know I'm going to go and join right after we hang up here. Thank you once again, Charlene, for being part of this. The book, again, is called The Disruption Mindset. You have been hearing the wise words of Charlene Li, and she can be followed at Charlene Li pretty much everywhere. CharleneLi.com for more resources. Quantum-networks.com if you want to join the movement. Thank you.
Thank you.
So it was so great to catch up with Charlene. As I said in the intro, we've known each other for a long time. She was always just one of the most brilliant people that I know. And now she's doing some humongous things that I'm definitely going to run out and join that Quantum Networks. Hope everybody enjoyed the conversation. The book, again, is called The Disruption Mindset. Yeah, I listened to it while running, basically, for the last couple of weeks. Really easy to read, and there was so many aha moments. It was packed full. You know how some books, they have one idea and then they spend the entire book sort of breaking down that idea. This book was packed full of ideas, so definitely check it out. Even if you're a small business, like her examples are very much from large organizations. But even if you're a smaller organization like ours, there were just so many pieces of advice. She just has so much experience that everything in that book is solid.
Awesome.
Yeah. And did you learn anything particularly from the conversation?
Well, I stayed quiet because I didn't have time to read the book. You were sort of reading the audio. I'll admit to that. So I stayed behind as sort of the audio engineer more than anything else. So, I mean, for me, it's sort of like, it just reaffirms the way you think, the way I think in terms of...
Did you see yourself in the worried skeptic?
Yes, I did.
And it's not a bad role. I think probably a lot of times because for anybody that knows Carlos and I, they would be like, oh, yeah, Tara's like the outspoken, the person whose vision goes out into the world, and Carlos is quieter. But Carlos, you bring a lot to the table. And I've always said this, even though you're no longer actively day-to-day in Truly, what you brought, especially while you were being active, I think you thought, oh, it's not very much, but it was huge for me. As a person who definitely has a disruptive mindset, pushes forward, likes to think big, is that optimist. I need that worried skeptic to basically keep things in check and balance.
Yeah. Thankfully, yeah.
Well, and it's nice. And even though you're not involved day to day, Christine Squire, who's our general manager now, she plays that role now. So that's amazing.
Exactly. That's why when she came in, I was like, I don't need to be around. Anyways,
thank you again, Charlene. And for anybody who's listening, do buy the book. It's well worth the read.
If you love this episode like we love this episode, please give us a thumbs up, a review on the Apple Podcast app. Actually, Apple Podcast is stars, but if by chance you're using an app that has reviews, please use it. And please recommend our podcast to other people in your...
Forward it.
Forward it to your friends, people who you think would find this really interesting, this conversation really interesting, and many of our other podcasts really interesting, because we are going on over 30, close to mid 30, almost 40 episodes at this point.
And we've had some amazing guests. If you are new to this podcast, including Nilofer Merchant and Cindy Gallup and Brian Solis and Mitch Joel and a whole bunch of other really cool people talking about various different, parts of a strategy, anatomies of a strategy.
Yeah. All right. So thank you very much. Have yourselves a good couple of weeks.
And see you soon.